Thanks for downloading the Marcus Pye podcast.
Welcome to the Marcus Pye podcast on historicracingnews.com. This episode brought to you by LeMansCoupes.com. Visit LeMansCoupes.com to see the range of iconic sports and race cars manufactured with the original designs of the 1960s. We've caught up with Peter Snowdon, who's the new director responsible for racing at the Aston Martin Owners Club. Also with David Hinton, who's president of Historic Sports Racing, HSR, the event promoter for historic racing in the States. It's an interesting interlude. I'm delighted to be joined by Peter Snowdon from the Aston Martin Owners Club. So you've been involved with Aston Martins all your life, and it's become an abiding passion, clearly.
Pretty well, Marcus. Yeah, I would say, far too long, probably. One way of looking at it, yes. It's been a long time, over 40 years now as a member, and probably been involved, would you say, all my life. So that's 56 years, isn't it? One way or the other, let's be honest.
So tell us how you first became involved with Aston Martins, your abiding passion.
Well, within the club, it was very simple. My father was very involved in motorsport. He was an observer and clerk of the course at Grand Prix back in the 50s, 60s, had always been involved in that way. My grandfather had an Aston, pre-war Aston back in the 30s, 40s. And Dad ended up buying a DB4 Vantage in 1972. He bought it the night before the St. John Horsehall meeting, and we drove to it the next day in the DB4, because it was a 9-year-old car then.
Was it revered as a classic or just an old car?
No, because I think that they were still obviously sort of making so V8s were coming in then, but DB6 was still the same sort of shape, so it wasn't radically different, and it was a DB4 Vantage in Caribbean pearl. It was a great colour,
absolutely,
and it was everything's all DB5 and silver birch now, isn't it? But it was a blue one, unheard of.
I guess you're very fortunate because your parents being involved. You just kind of grew with it, didn't you? You kind of went with the flow and followed their passion.
Well, they were. Dad was a great believer in grassroots motorsport, particularly. So they ran the Kerber Sprints meetings for the Aston Club for 39 years, actually, back to back, 2 meetings a year. And Dad always believed in the grassroots side of stuff, being literally put a timing strut on the front, which he objected to anyway, because that was changing the car. But putting a number on the side with the man with the white paint and putting the number on the side of the car and getting people to come out and literally take the spare wheel and tools out the back of the car in your DB6 or your DB5 or 4. And of course, the 1950s cars were very prevalent then, a lot of them about the 2.4s and all that sort of Mark 3s and DB2s. And getting people out and come and have a go was the idea. And if you built up to circuit racing, then that was great, was his idea. And he maintained that, and he ended up being vice president of the Aston Club right until his death 5 years ago.
You've raced lots of Aston Martins too, which is very special to you. Would you have a favourite among them?
Oh, crikey, I knew you'd swing that one on me. Yes, lots of DB4 lightweights, which of course was never an official factory car, but it was a interpretation of what the factory had. The factory racing department continued to develop cars in the early 60s with their road car and homologated it rather than the project cars they had. It was what Richard Williams thought they would do, and so it was his interpretation of how the car he'd worked there at the time. So phenomenal cars, 400 brake horsepower, just under 1,000 kilos, and as Jerry Marshall said at the time, what's not to like? It was just ridiculously quick, great fun, but very, very pliable. Well, very, very balanced car. Lots of them. I've raced a good handful of those. Of course, the modern cars, the N24 when it first came out, which shows my age because it's now called a V8 Vantage or a GT4 car, but it was an N24 when it came out 12 years ago, Marcus. Can you believe that? I know. 2007, remember, testing it at Goodwood. So raced that in British GT ultimately. And then, of course, more latterly, we've done the DB2 last couple of years in the RAC Woodcote Trophy, which has been my baptism of fire, learning about things like drum brakes. Which took me half a season to even find any.
For most small boys, driving a racing car at somewhere fantastic is just a dream. You've driven the DB2 at Spa. That's absolutely awesome. What are your memories of that?
It is phenomenal. It was the Motor Racing Legends series was a great series. It is a great series, and they've got some really nice events. So you have Donington Historic Festival to start with, and then the Thruxton 50th, as it was now, Historic Motorsport Celebration, Silverton Classic, support to the Spa 6 hour, and then they're all 1 hour races, then a 2 hour race in the Algarve Classic, which is great. And it's you say it's just and those cars ran in period there anyway. Obviously Spa was a slightly longer circuit in those days, but the Algarve racing into the night is crazy in 50s cars with 50s headlights, I hasten to add.
Where does the Aston Martin Owners Club sit regarding modifying old cars?
Well, obviously you've got to put safety first. Is the most important thing. So obviously we're allowed roll cages and correct modern seats and belts and whatever. But I do think you need to keep the cars as original as possible. We actually tried to run LED lights at the Algarve Classic, and it was spotted in qualifying, or spotted actually before qualifying, and we were told remove them and you're not allowed them for the race. So I think it's a good thing, to be honest. I wanted to be able to see where we were going, which is not unreasonable, I thought, as a driver in somebody else's car, which is not mine. But apparently, no, I have to be exactly as period. So, yeah, interesting. But obviously, we have modern overalls and things like that. And obviously, safety on fuel lines and stuff like that has to be paramount. But yeah, they should be as close to period as possible.
On that subject, you raced a Lotus Cortina a few years ago.
Over 20 years ago, Marcus, yeah, quite scarily. Mid-late 90s, yes. Historic Touring Car Championship with it twice.
Those Lotus Cortinas are now 4 or 5 seconds a lap quicker than when the great Jim Clark drove them at Goodwood. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a difficult one. I mean, that's largely down to people like Mike Jordan and his company doing that. And Mike's a great engineer, and I can't blame them for doing what they've done. It's a mixed feeling on that one, Marcus, because you look at them, it's absolutely fantastic what they've done, and they are engineered properly. But are they as they were in period? No, not at all. Not at all. They're probably safer if having an accident now, but are they original? I don't know. It's a double-edged sword, that one.
In your new role as director responsible for racing with the AMOC, what are your views on evolution, development of cars?
Not initially for now, maybe 2021, 22. I know that sounds a way off yet, but I've said all along since we took this on late autumn, sort of late October, early November, that it would be a transition year, 2020. We have to re-establish. Running a club these days, promoting is very, very expensive. Circuit hire, etc., has gone through the roof. If you look at the numbers of what it takes to run a day as a standalone meeting or as a club, it's phenomenal. Then you start breaking that down into per minute and not getting cars on a grid, you can suddenly see how very, very easy it is to actually make a loss. Not run a meeting. Running a meeting is quite easy. Making a loss is even easier. So that's why we're doing this year, just 1 year, one meeting this year, and then a series of out rounds, placing our series at different venues, because it's far more economical viably whilst we rebuild. So I'm going to say a 3 to 5, probably a 2 to 5 year plan, just to keep as many opportunities out there this year for our competitors to race. And then rebuild it, and hopefully we can get back to. It'd be nice to think we could run 3 meetings in 2021.
The club's changed immeasurably in recent years and has gone through quite a few metamorphoses. How's that all come about?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. As I said, promoting meetings cost a great deal of money. Running the actual day, quite naturally, the club and the membership in particular don't want their membership subscriptions to be used against racing for a few elite, mostly in the UK, which is completely understandable. So we had to try and make it, to ring fence it, make it stand alone. That was trialled 9 years ago with a company that didn't really work out that brilliantly. So we've had to reset it the last 2 or 3 years. We took Duncan Wiltshire and his great team at Motor Racing Legends on board to do that. And Duncan's done a great job, but it's time to move on and put it more, not so much in-house, but it is with the club, not financially in-house. We've got to have external resources to do that, income to do it. But Duncan's got his big things like obviously Donington Historic Festival and big meetings to do. So he's handed the reins over to us, and it's a kind of like a semi-reset, if you like. Just try and do it a new way if we can.
In a changing marketplace, is there truly room for clubs like AMOC to still promote their own race meetings?
I think there is, and I think actually quite the reverse. That there's, I think there's a great opportunity for that to happen now with small clubs. Do it properly. You just got to have a different way of looking at it. So, just for instance, things like I do think it's not a great deal about running Aston Martins anymore. Sadly, there's not a massive amount of those out there in the historic world anyway, because so few made. But I think it is about, if you want to continue a club promoting events, yes, we can. The typical Aston Martin driver now tends to drive to his race meetings in his Aston and then race another make of car. It's not about racing Astons anymore. Those days have gone. So we've got to adapt to that, and that's fine. That's what we do. For instance, things like the GT series has been closed closed to Dunlop tyres only the last few years, and that doesn't really incentivise somebody to come and try a 45, 50-minute race when you've got to buy a set of slicks and a set of wets, which suddenly sets you back a few £1,000s to do a toe in the water exercise where you may or may not like it, and people are going to try and do that. So this year I've opened up the regulations to say, yes, it's a slick tyre, but it can be other makes as well. So that way we might attract the Porsches, we've got the Cayman GT4 cars, then we can start to fill the grid. Because once we've got the grid's full, then we start to be more profitable. And it's all about making the money to reinvest it, to be able to buy the circuit deposits for next year, which we've got to start doing this summer already for 2021.
I guess now you have to take a view that profit is everything. Is that true?
It's a very good question, Marcus. It is difficult. When I first went to the committee management of the board back in beginning of November, I did say to them that with my family history, I'm going to be the last person that wants to say AMOT racing is dead. It's not going to happen. Of course I don't want to do that. But you've got to separate head from heart. Heart says, yes, I'd like it to continue. We've got a great history. I would like that to continue. But it's got to make money, or it's got to survive. And more to the point, it doesn't need to be a massive profit-making organisation, like a grown-up business in that sense, but it needs not to cost the club, let alone the membership, any money. So if it can wash its own face, that's absolutely fine. So that's what we're aiming for. But it is difficult sometimes because the emotion goes, oh, wouldn't it be nice to see, a paddock full of DB3Ss again? But it's not going to happen, sadly.
Is the escalating value of cars detrimental to the racing ethos of the club?
I don't think so per se, because you've only got to look at somewhere like Goodwood or Silverton Classic. The cars are out there. Perhaps some of the more genuinely historic cars, things like Aston DP212. Of course, there's only one ever built, and that's worth multi-millions now. How many of the E-types and Cobras that are racing, how many of those are actually real now? They're not. They're continuations or replicas, and there's a place for that. That's absolutely great. But and certainly not at club level. I don't think people are going to want to bring cars out for club meetings that are worth multi-millions of pounds. We had the reverse a few years ago when we had 6 years ago now, the 2013 anniversary to the 100 years of Aston Martin. And we had a great meeting at Silverstone. At Brands Hatch. Everybody got buoyed up by 2-day support. We had, Lord Drayson out in a DB4 GT and Tom Alexander with his GT and lots of lovely cars out, and it was great. But you knew because it was all tagged onto, it was the 100 years of Aston Martin, and great support from the factory. But it's a one-off, and we've got to wait another 100 years for that, and we won't be around to see that.
You've raced many cars. I mean, driving some very special ones must have given you a few scary moments down the years.
As well, Marcus, it comes with a responsibility. And yes, and sometimes it's the value of the cars. It does make you think. We had an incident 10 odd years ago at Snetterton before it was reconfigured with a very valuable Aston, as in DP212, worth probably, 15, 20 million or something at the time, potentially. And it's, let's just say the back end stepped away at a point of the circuit you wouldn't want it to do. And it was the beginnings of rear suspension failure, mercifully not terminal at the time, but enough to pit directly, shall we say, and it concluded the day. And it's one of those things where you just think, there by the grace of etc., another lap and maybe not. And it's my old mentor, Colin Blower, had a number of, he was running that car at the time, and had a number of great phrases I learned, one of which was, I've never yet met an owner that's thanked me for damaging his car. Which I thought was a great line, whether it was the workshop or on the track. And I thought, just always remember that.
Le Mans Coupes are the only manufacturer that can produce both road and FIA HTP spec GT40s with GT40P chassis numbers. All cars are factory built to the original designs, and our race cars are eligible for international competition. We also produce road and race Cobras and Corvette Grand Sports. Find iconic 60s sports and race cars at lemanscoupes.com.
You had an important meeting with potential competitors recently, and that's the lifeblood of the club.
It was, we did, just a month ago, and then a sort of tour around the works, at the factory, the Aston Martin works at Newport Pagnell, so a good spiritual place to have such a meeting. And it was an open floor Q&A bit as well, but presenting to the competitors, had a lunch and all that as well, that where we are, how it's come about, so they understand, not just sort of getting on the grapevine or paddock gossip. And then also, what do you want to do? This is your club. It's you want to go racing. What do you guys want to do? And within reason, we will facilitate that as much as we can. But we can't pull rabbits out of the hat because it costs X amount. So let's explain why it costs X amount so you understand, because they're all clever people that have made their money elsewhere in core industries to be able to afford to race these lovely cars in the first place. So, they're grown-up people.
And you came to some very positive conclusions out of that?
Very much so. There was a great positivity from the floor. People really wanted to see some changes, but the big thing was that supporting AMOC racing, that's what they really wanted to do. It's slightly different to some other clubs, neither better nor worse. It's just got a lot of history, and there's always been a great atmosphere in the paddock about AMOC meetings as well. You know, Mark, you've been to enough of them, and you've commentated on some with us. And that was coming back last year, which was really good. I think Snowdon in particular was a really good meeting, and quite a few people said it had a feel of the older days, even 5-10 years before, which we had lost a bit of direction. I'm not really quite sure why, but it's a broad church MOC. We've got to run it for, as I say, the most likely to run Astons are the GT4 series. Then we've got the GT Challenge. We've got Intermark, then we've got our 50s and 60s, so we've got our Jack Fairman Cup, and then the Innis Island Cup. We've just changed the regulation on that again for 2020. There'd been a cap put in a few years ago of up to 3 litre capacity, so I've removed that for this year so we can get E-types and things back in again. Falcons, all those nice big cars as well. And we don't want to take it away from everybody else, and I think that's possibly one of the problems, that there are so many series out there as well. You know, you report on it enough, that you've got to make it more of an appeal to people to say, why do I want to come to AMOC and run with 8 cars? You don't. You want to run with 25 cars. You know, I want to see a grid when it's under 20 and us be getting annoyed because it's only 19 cars. Not we made 19 cars. We've got to have a different way of looking at it. We've got to broaden the appeal for everybody.
2020 is going to be a really important season for AMOC. What will success look like?
Well, success is as many opportunities for our competitors to race their cars, the membership, where they want to, as we can, at various places. We've got the Jack Fairman Cup and Innis Island Cup now pretty well full. They've got 6 meetings, I believe, this year now. We've got our own standalone 1 meeting at the moment for 3rd of October, which will be the traditional St John Horsefall season finale, Silverstone National, 3rd of October. Put it in your diary. We're negotiating for another date at Snetterton, more late spring, early summer, maybe sort of June time. We're just working on that one at the moment. But in terms of going forward for 2021, we want to be in a position. The way this works is quite soon in a season, you need to start getting dates for the following season. And obviously those that can pay and pay deposits and all that get first dibs. It's quite natural. That's business. So we want to be in a nice, strong position financially, with people having entered, and that's where all the money comes from, where the profit, to reinvest any money we've got, any profit, into securing good dates for 2021. And that's, I was already even talking to a circuit yesterday about 2021 already, when I haven't even got a grid for them for 2020, which is slightly odd. But we're trying to work ahead.
Peter Snowdon, Director of AMOC, thank you so much for your time, and good luck.
Thank you, Marcus, and look forward to seeing you at one of our circuits, or our meetings this year.
Well, having heard from Peter, let's go international now and hear from HSR President David Hinton.
David, HSR had a fantastic year last year, and I was privileged to be part of that later in the year. Looking forward to 2020?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got one new event we've added this year. For 2020, we're going to go to Watkins Glen with the Masters Series. Masters is bringing the historic Formula One, their endurance legends, and they had some extra track time available. So I'm going to bring our Group 5 production car group up there, Corvettes, E-Types, 911 Porsches, that kind of car. So we're very excited about that. The remaining schedule is the same as 2019, so hopefully it'll be as good as 2019, if not better.
The HSR principle is very much about getting as many different sorts of cars in as you possibly can, and that seems to be working very well.
Yeah, we try and cover all the bases. We figure any car, we've got to try and find a home for it. To be eligible for podiums and points for our championship, the car has to be 5 years or older. So you can't show up with a brand new car and win the race and win the championship. So we do have a little bit of a rule there where it has to be 5 years or older. But these present day professional cars, they're extinct within 2 years. So they need somewhere to go, and it helps, I think, keep the racing economy going if the vintage groups offer homes to these retired GT and prototype cars. It gives the teams then the money to go out and buy the latest, greatest current race car.
Looking back at some of the races that you had this year, particularly Daytona, of course, you had some absolutely brilliant cars at that race in 2019.
Yeah, our featured group was Group E, and we had 2 Audi R8s, 3 Pescarolas. It was kind of mind-blowing what showed up. We haven't figured out why. It was just one of those lucky years, I think. But no, I mean, across all the groups, we had some great cars. The Lolas in Group A, and finally a 935 finished the whole weekend in Group B. So no, it was Daytona was a great event. Sebring, we had I think it was 9 vintage aircraft parked in the paddock, which is including a P-51 Mustang. So that was a special weekend. And in 2019, we did something totally different. We organized a road rally where everybody met in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we spent 4 days driving the mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina in street cars. These are all HSR members, racers who own very nice cars on the street, and they all came together and did 4 days, stayed at some beautiful old lodges up in the mountains of North Carolina, ate at great restaurants. So that sold out in 24 hours in 2019, and we've already got the same amount of entrants for 2020's Ridge Runner Rally. So we kind of broaden our horizons a little bit with what we do, not just on-track activity, but we're doing some stuff off-track, including retromobile.
With those kind of on-road events rather than on-track events, is that people bringing their daily driver, or what sort of cars are you having there?
We had a whole array. We had a couple of people show up with brand new Porsche GT3 RSs, whatever, and we went all the way back to people showing up with XK Jags, E-Types, 3-litre CSL. So we had a whole array of cars, and we open up. You can bring whatever you want. It's about the people as well as the cars. We kind of, I wouldn't say handpicked the entrants, but we monitored who was invited and who wasn't, shall we say.
Yeah, so clearly with that you can have a lot of fun. As a petrol head, and I know you are a petrol head, that you're going to some of the greatest circuits in the world, not only in the United States, and that must be a big buzz for you.
Oh yeah, no, some great tracks we get to visit. So we were just talking about Spa and some of the classic European tracks, and been lucky enough to go to those circuits myself. But in the US, we have some fantastic tracks, and also we go across the border with HMSA to Canada to Mont Tremblant, which is an old Can-Am and Formula One track from the 60s and early 70s, and that place is just breathtaking, and the surrounding area is one of the prettiest places in Canada, I'm sure.
Now, I know that you're a very busy man with HSR and everything that you're doing there, but that's not your only involvement in motorsport, is it? That you're spending time as well preparing and acquiring and selling cars as well?
Yeah, I think I have the disease, I guess you call it. I have a shop called Heritage Motorsport. I have about 15 clients with different cars, ranging from BMW CSLs, Porsche 911s, E-Type Jags, Ford Falcon, and then we go all the way up to Lola T70s, McLaren M1Bs, so we're kind of all over the place. We do about 15 events a year, mostly in America, but 2020 we're going to bring a couple of clients to Le Mans Classic, maybe Spa. Myself, I'm a big Jaguar person, got a E-Type, XK, that kind of stuff. And I was lucky enough a year ago to find an old Series 1 E-Type Coupe, which raced Sebring 4 times and Daytona 24 hours 3 times back in the 60s. So I almost finished restoring it. Bill Warner from Amelia Island Concours invited me to debut it there in March. So as soon as I get home from here, I'll be back to the grind, screwing the car back together.
With those kind of things, are you, obviously with the E-Type, that's a tear it down and put it back together again. With the other cars that you prepare, how much work is there to take that to a racetrack? Is it about tidying it up, or is it a complete rebuild?
So every once in a while we build a car from scratch. In 2019 we built 2 911 RS spec Porsches from scratch. Take a street tub, strip it all the way down and build it up. But most of the other cars it's just maintenance, unless they have an unfortunate accident, we have to do body repairs. But most of the clients, we're just maintaining their cars. They'll do a weekend and then just have a checklist, check over the car and get ready for the next one.
And you're developing those cars. I'm always intrigued by how much work people will do to fine-tune a historic race car, and how much the view is that's what it was like in 1966, so that's how it stays.
Yeah. We're not governed by the FIA, so we don't have HTP papers. So cars have been modified a lot more over the years than they have been in Europe. And the genie's too far out the bottle to bring it back to where they were when they were first built. So we've kind of got to deal with what we've got. We're trying to keep a grasp on it, keep a hold on it, so they don't get developed too much. And because obviously when you develop a car, you spend a lot more money than the guy next to you can afford to spend. So it's a bit of a problem we've got to kind of watch. And some of these guys are spending $50,000-$60,000 on a 3-litre 911 engine now, which is getting crazy. Yeah. So I think the HTP thing works very well in Europe, but it doesn't work for us because it's just too far gone.
As you say, the genie's out of the bottle. And I think the classic, probably, you talk about the Lola T70, they are far quicker now than they ever were in period.
Oh, yeah.
And not only quicker, but in relation to other cars as well. I mean, a T70 could not have lived with a 917, for example, in period, on most circuits at least. Whereas now, they're right up there.
Yes, and there's only 35 of the original 17 built left.
Yeah, that's unfortunately the world we live in now. But 2020 is going to be good for you, and clearly you're full of excitement for everything, both in heritage motorsport and in terms of HSR.
Yeah, no, I think we've got a great team. With all our staff at HSR, they all work very hard and all very dedicated, and we just keep doing what we're doing. I think we're on the right track. Events seem to be growing in the right direction, which is wonderful. So stick at it. Excited for 2020.
Well, we're looking forward to working with you in 2020 on historicracingnews.com as well. David Hinton, thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to keeping in touch with all the news as and when it breaks.
All right, thank you, Paul.
Well, that's really inspired me to go back to the States. I've not been for 20 years. I actually raced at Daytona last time I was there with HSR, in fact, in the year 2000. But I'd love to get over for one of those end-of-season enduro meetings and sample the Floridian atmosphere for myself. Well, that just about wraps up this week's podcast, brought to you by LeMansCoupes.com. If you like what you heard, please tell your friends. Or you can come back to us with ideas for the future, topics you'd perhaps like to have us look at, and you can go to podcast@historicracingnews.com to leave your views. Thanks very much.